Okay, hi everyone. So in case you're not sure, this panel is really about the SDGs, SDG 4 and EdTech. We have a pleasure of having incredible people on this panel. I'll let them introduce themselves. I'll just mention in case anyone doesn't know, who's heard of SDGs or SDG 4? Okay, so we'll just remind people, the SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the UN. These are 17 goals that the world is trying to achieve by 2030. And one of them, number 4, is around education, wanting to ensure sustainable, equitable, and quality education for all citizens in the world. And there's many subsections to it, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But how about we'll get a chance to everyone to just talk a little bit, 1 minute, about what you're doing and how it's relevant to SDGs 4, or education in general.
All right, so I'll start. My name is Cecile Blilious. I'm the founder and managing partner of Impact First Investments. We are Israel's first impact investing vehicle that invests in the Sustainable Development Goals, so looking at Israeli technology for social and environmental impact. We are only supporting or investing in companies that are maximizing profits and maximizing their impact. The Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are our Bible. This is what we go through. We are looking at creating a scalable positive impact on society at large. And SDG number 4 is our target today, but definitely bringing the companies together with the roadmap of the SDGs.
Hi, I'm Noga Levtzion Nadan. I'm a managing partner in Value Squared Fund. It's an investment fund that invests in public equity. And in our public equities and the companies we invest in are only companies that have 3 factors. One, their operation in terms of the environmental and social issues, they are above average. But more than that, they have some kind of revenue from SDG, some kind of revenue from solution, and one of them is education. And the third pillar is financial strong enough to be invested in.
Excellent. My name is Michalec. I'm not an investor. So my background, before starting EdTech Asia about 5 years ago, I worked in international development for about a decade and actually worked quite a bit on the predecessor to SDG, which was the Millennium Development Goals. And the education component of that was called Education for All. So at the moment, my company does a lot of research and produces a lot of knowledge assets. Most recently, we produced a piece for Omidyar Network, which is an investment group, but essentially evaluating EdTech ecosystems around the world and how they're contributing to equitable, sustainable education.
So my name is Sharad Agarwal. I'm the founder of Indian School of Development Management. It's kind of a unique college based out of India, focused on creating professional managers for the social sector. We looked around and we realized that there is a whole shortage of professional managers, and we try to bring business management ideas into trying to train non-profit managers, and it's completely different. India is a great lab for anybody to learn about any of the SDGs. We have so much of issues on, while we have a large population of 1.3 billion, we also have 300 million people who are below poverty line. We have issues on education, we have healthcare, sanitation, and therefore it's a great lab which we are now investing in for research, for creating body of knowledge, and running a master's program and a research program as we move forward.
Thank you. So I think one of the big questions I have in an event like this is, would we take for granted that any company that has created an educational technology solution, is it creating impact? Is it really addressing the SDG and advancing it? So I would like to ask you guys to see, to talk about a company or two that you know that is technologically focused. It's an EdTech company, but it's also very related to the SDGs. And if you don't know any, then maybe the challenge that you've met, why is there a gap there? Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, Yeah, so most of the companies that we work with, that I work with specifically, are in Asia, and I think that's actually a huge issue in terms of companies that are specifically addressing core issues in education. Initially, when EdTech became kind of more mainstream, maybe a decade ago, the obvious connection was accessibility, but we've kind of overcome that. Now it's about quality. So there's some companies that are helping to improve quality education. There needs to be more. Well, we use China for an example. If you look at a lot of the larger Chinese EdTech companies, there's, I think, roughly 6 or 7 unicorns now. But they're essentially all targeting a specific price point. Some of them are offering new products kind of in third-tier cities, but essentially they're all focusing on the main cities. So we need to have some incentive or some alternative kind of structure to help these larger companies kind of address lesser represented populations, yeah.
So in India, there is a platform called EdTech, which has been created to look at the ecosystem and build a technology platform, where what they thought was that we should not spend time building the technology platform. The objective is, can we put content in it? Can we use the platform well? And it's a completely open, free platform. Has been funded by one large philanthropist who used to own one of the largest IT companies there. And it's a large project. They've invested about $100 million in it. On the other hand, I have this issue with technology when we see it as in education, is that education is very contextual. And sometimes technology tries to homogenize everything. And therefore, it is needed as we move forward that we have the ability to build a context in how we use technology. Because India is a diverse, and I'm giving an example, India is very diverse. We have caste, we have different regions, we have different languages. And we realized that a one shoe would not fit all.
In our fund, we are looking for companies that are doing exactly what you're asking, are taking the technology and using it as an impact tool. And one interesting company that we know all, Ericsson, the Swedish company, is part of a partnership, a private-public partnership called Connect to Learn. It's with Columbia University and Millennium Promise. And what they do is they use, the whole idea is helping girls in different areas to finish secondary school. And they use the technology in order to help them finish this secondary school. And I think that's what's interesting, that when they look at the impact, they say that they have 1,200,000 people, students that already had an impact. So I think that's the challenge. When we challenge companies, it's exactly what you're asking. Are we going to take this technology and use it for the rich? Or are we going to take this technology and use it for the ones that need it?
Okay, so I'm going to try to bring this to the ground level for a second. No tracking, no measurement, no impact. Simple. If you are in any space, healthcare, education, I don't know, you name it, agriculture, whatever, technology, non-technology, whatever it is, if you're not putting any KPIs, any key performance indicators, targets that have a business meaning and an impact meaning for society or for the environment, and you're not putting those up to tracking, hence you're not creating an impact map that will allow you to direct yourself in achieving these goals, and eventually tracking periodically, did you achieve these goals? Then maybe you're not making any impact. So the fact that you're in the education space doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have an impact on society. And society needs to be defined. What is society? Who is society? Are you impacting 20 people, or are you impacting 200 million people? There are all kinds of questions that we as impact investors need to ask the companies, and the companies need to ask themselves. I don't believe in just saying, I'm a good person, or I'm a great company, I make a lot of impact, but I'm not tracking any of it. Maybe I'm not making any. So I think this is critical. If we don't put this in place, it's non-existent. The impact investors, the SDG-related investors, must put in impact metrics. If they don't, then anything can be impact. So it's really very, very clear, simple, but critical.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I think we heard in this conference a few times some of the Israeli investors saying, if you're investing in education, you're an impact investor. And I think maybe some of us know that the danger in that kind of approach, that without measuring the impact and checking what you're actually doing, maybe you don't know. So one of these questions, and I think education is a great platform for this, is that these kind of SDG issues are traditionally public sector issues, and especially with education, the people that are implementing a lot of the times the solutions are public sector. So I was wondering, and I know in EdTech, a huge issue of making this happen is a strong partnership between the public sector, whoever's implementing the technology or bringing in the challenges, and the technology developers, the entrepreneurs, the companies. So I was wondering if you guys have such an example of a good partnership that works, that you know maybe some of these entrepreneurs and investors in the audience can learn from. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think, again, kind of going back to the statement before, there needs to be new mechanisms to incentivize attention on specific core issues in education. Gender disparity, literacy, numeracy, early years, because a lot of the attention is again, in EdTech going to kind of the top tier segment. But I think to answer your question specifically, if you look at open innovation, for example, I think we talked about Elon Musk and the X Prize, which is a great kind of public-private partnership kind of incentive where if you're unfamiliar with that, he basically said, I'll give the top team, I think it was $15 million. They just awarded it a few weeks ago. It was a 4-year piloted program with 600 EdTech companies that initially started, and basically they had to come up with a solution specifically for sub-Saharan Africa that addressed early years numeracy and literacy for 8 to 12 years. So very specific, but they got a good solution. It's now an open source solution. So I think more Yidin Prize, which is the co-founder of Tencent, one of the large, they have a similar project. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more kind of open innovation type of solutions that play that middle intermediary role between government, public, and private.
I want to refer to one really quickly issue. There's a difference between the outputs and the outcomes. And I think that the government level or policymakers are looking at the outcomes. So if you look at education, you'd like to know, has the population really been educated? Do people really have better jobs? Do they have better education? Is that translating itself into better science, better life, all kinds of things that need to be measured on the outcomes level. Whereas a lot of technology companies have a tendency to go to the outputs, thinking, okay, so we signed up 200,000 people, okay, great output, and now we have revenues based on that. But what is the outcome? Has it actually been achieved? So that is something that needs to be put in the front. And this partnership with the private sector and the public sector is where the outcomes and the outputs need to be combined.
And I think there's also a whole thought process of being inclusive. Yeah. The whole idea is that when we are very focused on the private sector education, then the way we build our technologies, the way we look at things has to be relooked if we want to do it for the large public sector and for the larger crowd.
Just one second about the SDG. When we speak about the SDG and the world, we speak about 10% of the money will come from the public, 90% of the money will come from the private sector and investments. So therefore, we have to have the public as a backing, but the majority of the money will come from and is coming from the private sector. And that's why this partnership is so crucial, because we need the private sector needs the public sector to give the infrastructure and the ecology to come there, and in order for it to happen. And I think education is a prime example. I gave the example of Connect to Learning. It's where Colombia brings the research, the millennials are giving the adaptation in the land, and the technology comes from a company, Ericsson in this case. But the whole idea is it has to come together, because otherwise it won't work.
Well, thank you. So we're out of time, but really I think what we hope to keep in mind here is the idea that while we can pull capital and innovation and business from the private sector, in order to understand the real challenges and make a proper impact, we have to bring in the knowledge from the different developing countries and whatever the challenges are to make it happen. So thank you guys for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leehe, Cecile, Mike, Sharad, and Noga.